Welcome to the J.John and Tom Wright podcast. Hello, Tom.
Hello, John. Here we are again.
Here we are again. In the last episode, we talked about baptism, and I'd love us to have a conversation in this episode about Holy Communion, breaking of bread, the Eucharist. What does the word Eucharist mean?
Eucharist means thank you. So calling it the Eucharist means it's the thank you service. So different traditions have had different words, and I remember when I was growing up it was always Holy Communion, and then we had a new rector and he wanted us to call it the Eucharist, and some people were quite suspicious about that. It's basically, this is a thank you meal. What's not to like about that? And the answer was, oh well, some Christians say it and they mean funny things by it and we're not quite sure about that. And then of course in Roman Catholic tradition it's the Mass, which comes from the Latin word missa est, there is a sending, which is what the priest says at the end of the Mass. And so in popular conversation, are you going to the missa est, to the Mass, which is an odd way for a word to start, but it really doesn't matter.
No, it doesn't
The
matter.
important thing is Jesus told us to do this. The Gospels say so, Paul says so, even if we don't understand why he told us to do it. And there are many things which we're told to do which we don't immediately understand, just like in ordinary life. Many laws that our countries make, I don't know why they've got that law, but I don't want to be put in jail, so I better keep that law. But how much more important when Jesus, as this extraordinary act of love, says, do this in remembrance of me. And something, I've often said to people, we have many theological theories about why Jesus went to the cross. When Jesus wanted to explain to his followers what his forthcoming death was about, he didn't give them a theory, he gave them a meal.
Yes.
And the point about the meal is that it isn't just something you hold in your head. Oh, I've got this nice theory about what was going on. It's something you feed on, you feast on, as though the significance of Jesus' death and resurrection is so huge and all-embracing that you need to eat it, you need to drink it. It needs to become part of you. And that goes way beyond any sort of mere, oh yes, I've understood it, so I put a mental tick by that box. It says this involves you, it involves your real life, it involves the transformation of your real life. You are transformed by what you eat. And so the idea of eating and drinking, when Jesus says, this is my body, this is my blood, that is designed to be part of the ongoing transformative life of God's people.
So Jesus with his disciples had a meal. Just remind us how Jesus explained it.
Okay, it was a sort of Passover meal. We're not sure if it was actually how much of it was really Passover meal, because Jesus did something different at the middle of it. I don't know if you've been, you probably have to Passover meals with Jewish friends. And one of the features of the Passover meal is that you tell the story of the Exodus from Egypt, because that's what Passover is all about. It looks as though, at the moment critique, when Jesus might have said, this is the blood of the covenant which God has made with you, or whatever, he instead says, this is my blood of the new covenant. And instead of the ordinary Passover bread, this is my body. And so Jesus is taking the idea of Passover, which is about God's great act of redemption, redeeming his people from slavery in Egypt. And in many Jewish traditions, Passover is linked also with creation and with Abraham sacrificing Isaac. In other words, it's one of the key moments in a long chain of events which are all about God coming to rescue, to redeem, even if it's in ways we don't understand, and to do new creation. So Jesus builds up to this. It's really, in a way, part of the whole climax of the Gospels. What he does in the temple, which is to call down God's judgment on the temple in Jerusalem. Then he takes his followers off to the upper room, almost as a replacement, that now, instead of that bricks and mortar thing, we are having flesh and blood, my flesh and blood, but your flesh and blood. And we are now being constituted as the true Passover people for the world. And you can see that then going on through Paul and through into Ignatius of Antioch in the second century and out beyond. And, the extraordinary thing is that when you or I do this extraordinary, simple and yet profound act now of breaking the bread and pouring the wine, we remind ourselves this has been done every day and every week for the last 2,000 years. It's been going on in private houses, in great cathedrals, down by the beach here and there, out in the desert. And it's one of the things which says, we are the people defined by the death and resurrection of Jesus of Nazareth, who we believe to be the Messiah and the world's Lord.
And I remember that the astronauts, when they went to space, they took Holy Communion.
Did they?
Yes, they did.
Know that. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting. There's all sorts of questions to ask about that, but okay, fair enough.
But we're remembering the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
And so Jesus, in many ways, was implying, this is the heart of it.
Yeah. Well, it's the totality of the event which involves him coming to Jerusalem, denouncing the present system under the chief priests, etc., having this meal with his followers, and then going off through the Garden of Gethsemane to be tried and then put to death and then raised from the dead. All these mean what they mean in relation to one another. People sometimes talk about the Paschal event, meaning the whole thing, which is Jesus. Jesus chose Passover as the moment to go and do this. He didn't choose the Day of Atonement. He chose Passover because the whole thing is Passover. It's about God rescuing people from slavery. And ultimately, as Jesus says, the one who commits sin is a slave of sin. So sin and death, all the ways in which we have messed up and our world has messed up, God in Christ has come to rescue us from that, to be people of new creation. And this is, when you and I were walking down the street just now, I don't know if you saw, but there was a food delivery van delivering to one of the colleges. They have a slogan on the side of their van, which is food for a new world. And I've often seen that and thought, that's a good definition of Holy Communion. Food for a new world. This is, when we take this, we are saying we want to be both part of it ourselves and also equipped by this food to be people of the new world.
Yeah. Now, different church traditions, Tom, perceive it in different ways. There's a church tradition that believes it literally becomes the body and blood of Jesus. There's a church tradition that says, no, it's just total symbolism. I'm halfway.
Yeah.
I think it's more than symbolism. I personally believe something happens.
Yeah, I'm totally with you. And part of our trouble here is the old debates that were generated by the medieval theology coming out of Thomas Aquinas and other people, where, it's a kind of a technical philosophical trick to say, well, there's a difference between the substance of what something really is inside itself and its accidents, which is a philosophical way of saying, it looks like bread, it tastes like bread, it feels like bread. Those are just the accidental outsides of it, but inside there's a real substance. And then, because they don't say the accidents have been changed into the accidental reality of Jesus' body, they say it's the substance. Now, most people in the Middle Ages, late Middle Ages, didn't understand that philosophical decision. So they thought that the priest was performing a bit of sympathetic magic, actually to turn this into the real physical body of Jesus. And different reformers and different movements have tried different ways round that or through that. And it seems to me that whole scheme of thought needs to be reworked in a much more ancient Judaic way, which was about God saying, I'm going to come and fill this whole creation with myself, with my glory, with my love, with my purpose. And Jesus is the one who instantiates that. He is the living God in person. So then I want to say it's about space, time and matter, that it's as though all the world is at that moment focused on this upper room in Jerusalem. And all the ages of history before and since are focused on this time, this moment. And when we break the bread and share the cup, it's as though the past, from creation, Exodus, Jesus, and the future, the day when he will come again, these are all somehow present. I've sometimes said it's like being in a railway station, and there's a train coming past us from that direction, another one coming from there, that the past comes forward to meet us, and the future comes back to greet us, and we are caught within past and future. So space and time are all coming together. And I think the material world, God always intended heaven and earth to be one, not separate. And I believe that in the Eucharist what we have is a foretaste of heaven flooding earth. And this is not dependent on some Aristotelian scheme or Aquinas scheme about a magical transformation. It's about saying that there are some times and places and events when heaven and earth really do come together. And this bread and this wine are one such. I've worked this out in various things that I've written, but the sad thing is that communion is so important, so we shouldn't be surprised that the church has had squabbles and controversies about it, because like the meaning of the cross itself, to which it's so closely allied, the enemy is not such a fool as to leave that citadel unattacked. And so, but if we get hung up on the controversies, we can miss the glory of the moment. So I want to say, think about space, time and matter from a first century Judean point of view. And actually, they all come together, and it makes the sense it makes.
Recently, Tom, this man reached out to me because he was dying and asked me to pray for him. So in fact, not far from here, went to pray for him and met his wife. And I didn't know that she had some health issues as well. Anyway, I gave them both Holy Communion before anointing him with oil. Anyway, and then discovered that she had an eye condition.
Ouch.
That couldn't get rid of this, couldn't sort it, had a throbbing knee for 6 months. But when I gave her Holy Communion, she was instantly healed.
It's wonderful.
Like
Hallelujah.
Instantly. But
That's
I didn't
great.
even pray for healing.
She wasn't the main subject. She
wasn't the main. And we live in this world of miracle and mystery.
But you see, I'm always suspicious of the word miracle, because it sounds as though I know you don't mean it like this, but it sounds to many people as though there's a God who's outside the system, who occasionally reaches in and does something and goes away again. Whereas the whole point is that God intends heaven and earth to come together for keeps, not as a one-off. And God has launched that project in Jesus. He's now doing it through the Spirit. And all this comes rushing together with the bread and the wine. Yeah.
How often should we take Holy Communion? Because in some churches, Tom, it's only offered once a month. And if you don't go to that particular service, then you're going to miss out. Then there are other people... I mean, I like it every week. There are some people that take it every day.
Yes.
How often?
I think it's a discipline that every Christian should think and pray about and ask their pastoral guides about. There have been times in my life, especially when I was a college chaplain, when I was working pastorally with people in a very busy college, when I needed it every day. There were things going on which I needed to be able to bring to the table, issues in the college, issues with colleagues, whatever, where I needed to say, I'm bringing this to the table, and the bread and the wine, somehow it holds it all and transforms it, and I'm able to go out and do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. For myself, normally, from the day I was confirmed, which was my 15th birthday, I started then taking communion once a week in school chapel, and then and that's been my preferred option. Where Maggie and I have our home in Scotland, the local churches there, it's about every 3 months. But when they do it, they have a whole season where for some days they have services of preparation, and then the service itself, and then they have a Thanksgiving service the afternoon of that day. So though it's infrequent, boy, they take it very seriously. And I honour that, even though it's not my preferred mode.
No, but I think it's important to encourage believers to take communion.
To take communion regularly and to find the appropriate discipline for themselves, which may change over time from when they're young, when they're old, whatever.
Sure. Now, what about children,
What about
Tom?
children? Yeah.
When is it appropriate for children to take communion?
Yeah, I had never run into this one until we moved to Canada in 1981, which is actually where you and I first met.
Yes.
And I discovered that the Diocese of Montreal, where I was working, had just been having a huge row about this because many people were saying we should share communion with our children. There's no reason why they should wait for confirmation. That's not in the Bible to have to make that wait. And there are other people who are saying, no, this is like opening presents before Christmas. You shouldn't be doing that. And so there was a big row about it. And I was put in charge of a synod working party, and I phoned round all the clergy in the diocese who'd ever spoken in debates about this, and I tabulated all the arguments pro and con, and I then circulated my comments on this, and the next year at the diocesan synod it went through on the nod. But here's the thing, that it was, as a matter of church discipline, it was one of those things which the Anglican Communion as a whole had not really wrestled with until, I think, maybe the 60s or 70s. But then when the Lambeth Conference discussed it, they decided there was no reason why children shouldn't receive communion with appropriate safeguards, the children of believing families, etc., but that it was then up to the individual diocese to discuss. And the individual dioceses then discussed it, and many of them said it's now up to the individual parishes. Because, in other words, we don't want people going rogue and just dashing off and doing things miscellaneously. This is a very serious thing we're doing, so we want it to be done decently and in order, as Paul says. Having said all of that, one of the things I know about little children is that they find out about life by putting things in their mouths. Isn't that interesting?
It is.
And I think the idea that you might find out about Jesus by putting him in your mouth, that may sound shocking, but actually there's something, I think, very profound. And I know in your tradition, the Greek tradition, when children are baptized, they receive a tiny little sliver of Holy Communion. The other thing is, I remember a long time ago, I had some cousins who, though they're the same age as me, they got married much later than Maggie and I did, and their children were born when ours were already teenagers. And when their first child was born, the wife said to me once, she said, "Tom, how old does a child have to be before they're aware of God?" And I said, "About 5 minutes."
Yes.
And she looked rather horrified, as though she was expecting me maybe to say 7 or 8 or something. And I said, "Listen, when a child is born, the natural focus of the child's eyes is when they're feeding at the breast between the child and the mother. That's where the eye naturally focuses." I say, and if you as a human parent can establish that deep, intimate contact with the child, what would we be saying about God if we thought that he couldn't establish contact with that child? So that if a child is brought up in a praying home, you might expect as the norm that when the child comes to articulation, they will already have a sense of the presence of God.
Yes.
I remember one of my children, before we introduced children receiving communion, kneeling at the communion rail with Maggie and me, and when being told, "No, keep your hands down because you're just going to get a blessing," she said, "Why can't I have it? I love Jesus too."
Yes.
And I remember thinking, I cannot possibly say to this small child, no, dear, you don't love Jesus. That's something you'll find out when you're older. Of course they can love Jesus.
Yes.
Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." Now, of course, there is a matter of discipline, that it shouldn't be a free-for-all. It ought to be within the families who make up the church.
Yes.
And if there are children who those kids have brought to Sunday school who are coming to faith, well, they should have sponsors from within the Sunday school, so that it isn't just a random free-for-all. But as you detect, I have come to the position where I say it was a medieval idea to restrict communion to people who've been confirmed, and that was simply done in order to boost the number of confirmation candidates. So no, you can't have communion until you come. Oh well, we better get confirmed then, and then that somehow got stuck. And so I want to say now we need to find appropriate ways of discipline, but yes, this is a whole family thing, and we should celebrate it as such.
Now, there's a warning or an instruction in the New Testament, Tom, about not taking Holy Communion if you've got a grudge against somebody. And I don't think I've ever heard that referenced in any church service I've ever been to since 1975. Why don't we take that seriously?
The old prayer book had a whole exhortation in it, which I haven't heard read except on very special occasions, which is about, if there's something needs putting right, then put it right.
Yes.
Like you have to examine yourself before you eat the bread and drink the cup. And, of course, self-examination is something which, as you get older, it should go deeper. You should know more about yourself to examine, which is a bit of a scary thought. But in terms of part of the self-examination being, am I out of sorts with somebody? Is there somebody who I've got a grudge against? And actually, the old church discipline, as in the prayer book, was very much, no, if there's something gone radically wrong here, we need to sort this out.
Yes.
I remember one time when I was in student ministry, when two students who knew each other very well, part of a same tutorial group, I think, had a major fallout. And I forget whether it was about a girlfriend or whatever it was, but they'd had a major fallout. And one of them was so upset that they got on a train and went off home. And they were regular members of my Eucharistic congregation. I remember saying to the people who knew them, we are not going to rest until we've got these two at the communion rail again. Oh. And it took about 6 weeks, but we got there. Because it was a scandal. It should not be. We are part of one body. That's hard work. Reconciliation is hard work.
But it also shows how important, Holy Communion is, and that, if we don't treat it with respect, we're in danger of bringing judgment on ourselves.
Paul is very clear about that.
He's so clear.
And I think, as I say, this is addressed to that situation in Corinth, where people had said, there's this new religion. We go down the road and they're singing these fun things. And sometimes people speak in odd tongues and it's all good fun and come on in. And you go up and you receive this. And Paul says, no, you've got to examine yourself. And I have found this difficult in some contexts. When I was working in Westminster Abbey, sometimes just before the service, a couple of buses would arrive full of tourists from, say, Japan.
Yes.
And sometimes they then flood into the church, and then if it's a communion service at a certain point, everyone else is going up to the front to receive something, so they go up to the front to receive something. Now, it's very difficult if you're ministering in that situation to say to people, sorry, no, sorry, no, sorry, no.
No, of course.
So what we used to do with prayer and hope and rather trembling faith is to say, please, Lord, will you bless these people somehow through this, even though they don't have the slightest idea what's going on. Now, there are some rigorists who would say, we should have said, no, if you're coming here, we're not having a communion service because you don't know what you're talking about. We never took that line. But I respect those who would say we should have been a bit more careful.
But as we started, Tom, Jesus instructed us to do this.
Yeah.
In remembrance of him.
And it was Jesus' grid of interpretation, if you like. It was the lens through which Jesus wanted his followers to understand what his cross and resurrection was going to be all about.
And that is the heart of the gospel.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Tom, as always, a delight to talk with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much.